A pleasure to meet all at last, and welcome back once again to HJN Season 4, or in this case, HJN Super Graphics. For this instance, I'm going to be taking us into the second out of 4 current existing pieces of the Dark Pictures series. For number 2586, I'm proud to present Dark Pictures' Little Hope. Yeah, the story about some abandoned town, which many years ago was the unfortunate source of a number of problems, from house fires to witchcraft. Little Hope was indeed a unique specimen, where a ghost town becomes the primary place, a breeding ground for certain troubles from a people from afar, especially when it came to a bus full of tourists. Yeah, basically, if you're not familiar with it, do go play the game right now. But if you have, listen here. Much like Man of Medan, I played through Little Hope in the same way I would eventually play through House of Ashes and then The Devil in Me. Throughout 2022, I can proudly say that I have gone through all 4 of these games here, and of course became the subject of the teaser trailer for Directive 8020. And as we know, we have finally gotten ourselves a good slated release date, and I'm more than glad that they finally were able to pull through in spite of such harsh conditions and predicaments. But above all that though, let's get on to the game itself. Little Hope begins with a bus full of students, their professor, and of course the driver. Unfortunately, the main road in which that they're about to head down on becomes blocked off. A detour is made by the driver. And in a small town known as Little Hope, which had been abandoned for some time, unfortunately, this becomes a tempting fate. Because what happens is that the bus ends up losing control and crashing in the middle of town. And this is apparently where not only we just found out that the bus likely ended with people either injured or killed, but were eventually led to some sort of backstory, a prologue if you will. It describes a certain thing in the 1970s that happened to some sort of family. A family that apparently lived in this same town. And this same town, like most places that used to exist, is in fact well regarded for what it used to serve. Humble abodes for many families alike, as well as a variety of different services and venues, from churches to stores. Yeah, basically though, this family in particular, with a mother and a father, son and daughter, basically what happens is that in this particular case, James and Anne, as well as 4 children, Anthony, Tanya, Dennis, and Megan, whom I should mention, much like with the first game, were in fact played by different actors. You have actors that were on the set, in which that it was computerized using motion capture technology, in the same regard as how King Kong 2005, The Polar Express, Adventures of Tintin, and many other forms of media did utilize said CG effects in an amazing way. But in the case of these games, it was common to have an actor for the set and an actor to do the voice. But of course, much like the first game, and in the same way that the box art featured Conrad on Man of Medan, in the case of Little Hope, we have Andrew, whom is one of the 5 protagonists involved in Little Hope, with the 4 others, not including the driver, as I'll talk a bit more about him later. There's Angela, Taylor, Daniel, and John, whom is the professor of the group of college students in particular. But of course, regardless of whom played the characters and how it all went down, the thing is that this family, back in the 70s, and the fact that it used to have their own home, the reason why they don't anymore is because what happens is that a doll is left behind where it burns up and starts a fire inside the house itself. The house eventually burns up, and Anthony, in spite of him being the only survivor, while the rest were burned to a crisp, he decides to run back in and join his family. Yeah. Not a great way to start off the game here. You have an incredibly bad note here. An entire family burned to a crisp inside of a smoldering household. Yeah. All because a doll was laid around in a sensitive area. It really goes to show, kids will be kids, but fates are always going to be sealed, regardless of the circumstances. Anyways, though, we eventually cut back to the present where, thankfully, the 5 survivors are inside, with the driver not being so lucky. So, what these guys do here is they try to explore the town here, especially the nearby tavern, in which that they come across a certain reverend. This reverend in particular does explain the history that had taken place, and well, the thing is, not only is this guy trying to basically do something, it's not so great. Yeah. Well, we should mention that there's also a guy named Vince, whom was actually Tanya's boyfriend at the time of that house fire. And well, this is eventually where we are led to some impressive circumstances, as well as a variety of different things that help clue in as to what happened in the town itself. Because what happens is that every time an object is picked up or every time something is found, it seems that there is some sort of backstory that gets implanted into their minds. I mean, Andrew is discovering things, and Tanya is seeing things. It seems that every time that something in Little Hope is picked up, there is some sort of magic that is brainwashing them and causing them to experience points in the past where said items that were touched had apparently had some sort of history with them. The thing is, Little Hope actually used to be a big, big source of witchcraft. And at the time, this was apparently made as some sort of religious beneficiary. The thing is, the whole town itself used to be a big series of denoting. A majority of the people involved in the town itself of Little Hope, Reverend Carver, whom was back in the day, a big responsibility for such horrible travesties against the people of Little Hope. And this sort of witchcraft and blackmailing and magic, it sure was a feast for the mind. I myself would never have imagined that such incredible stuff like that could have possibly taken place. But then again, knowing that this was a big part of history and the true understanding as to what had actually happened and why all of these people ended up paying such a big price, well, it does all boil down to the real big, awful moment. Because what happens? Well, Andrew apparently fires a shot from a nearby gun. The gun does in fact spook a bystander. And well, we'll talk more about this guy later on. Because you want to know what the ending of the game itself was? After all that we've been through, and after all the crap that went down, it turns out I ended up blowing through all of my protagonists. Except for Andrew, the only survivor of the group. But here's the thing. The ultimate twist to this whole thing is that Andrew was the bus driver. Yeah. And remember when I mentioned that in my experience, a gun was fired, thinking that there was a nearby monster? Well, apparently, all of said stuff were a series of hallucinations. And Andrew was apparently some crazy man who may have had some experiences back then, which did allow for him to have such mental insecurity as well as said problems. And because of that gunfire that happened earlier, the police were called. And Andrew got taken away from the town itself in a cruiser. So all this time, this exploring of a town from a bus crash was because Andrew himself was the driver. And on top of all that, he was experiencing a number of issues. And the town itself seemed to really give him a ton of issues. But in all reality, it was just some sort of illusion. Well, that is quite the twist. But I will say it unfortunately ain't very original. As insane as that possibly is, it unfortunately does not quite stack up against the likes of various other media that has, over the years, shown us a multitude of possibilities that could go wrong with someone's mentality. Pure insanity has given us a lot of mileage over the years. But Little Hope, I will say, does at least pull off a unique, elaborate job at giving us a number of different things that could possibly show up for if somebody were to, let's say, explore an abandoned town. And I've had a lot of documentaries that I've watched over the years. And I could thank such YouTubers out there like Part-Time Explorer, or I guess a number of others. Instinct. Yeah. I've had a lot of experience understanding history, even if it's extremely obscured, because there's a lot of brave adventurers out there whom dare to explore and look for parts of the past that may have been forgotten. I mean, it's incredible just how much we have yet to experience and what we have yet to discover. So in the basis of Little Hope, in contradiction or possibly even in comparison to Man of Medan, while I would say that the idea of having a bus driver crash into the middle of a certain abandoned town and accidentally become involved in some sort of extreme hallucinogenic experience, only to eventually be taken away by police, it almost does sort of ruin the experience. We can understand that the fact is that hallucinations really can downplay on one's life significantly. But in this case, it wasn't really my fault. That gunshot it fired was because, of course, there was a monster nearby. What was I going to do? Just let it attack the bystander? But then again, if it was an illusion, none of my words are possibly making any sort of sense or any sort of logical meaning. So, yeah, that's just the thing about it. It is a total mind wipe and mind screw up. Yeah. For that, I feel like that while Little Hope does have a number of merits, including giving us a unique piece of history when it came to a certain abandoned town that we were exploring throughout the whole length of the game, up until the point where we discovered that it was just a bunch of hallucinations by an old man, well, that gives a lot of points. And I will say that through the tutelage of a certain curator, once again played by Pip Torrens, and accompanied by a certain rock song in the background. And then, of course, the actors all did a really good job in their certain roles, both in the flashbacks as well as in the present day. Scenery. And with all the other things involved, I'd say this does give it a good scoring, probably a 7.8 out of 10.1. Pretty much being better than Man of Medan, but I would say it still does need a bit more TLC, if you will, to truly make the elaborate experience even more profiting and formidable, and possibly even rewarding. Because while the end, unfortunately, does not quite do such a good way to give us the idea that all of this was just some sort of crazy experience, yeah, that's just the thing about it. Revealing all of this stuff at the end to be some sort of crazy mind wipe just doesn't really play out so well for me, knowing that I've had experience in other fields as well. But you know what? Let's just say that we're only halfway there. And as Little Hope did express to us at the very end of the game, House of Ashes would become the next installment in the series. But I'll talk more on that one tomorrow. If you want to see more, go down to my channel. Make sure to like, subscribe, comment, follow me wherever you can find me, and stay on the Hollywood side for more.